The colony ship moved through space like a wounded animal. Its metal sides were full of holes from space rocks, and broken parts hung loose in the cold emptiness. Captain Marcus Reed stood in the control room watching the planet get bigger on the screen. The green and brown world turned slowly below them, and he could see storm clouds covering most of its surface. Dr. Lisa Park looked at her computer screen with worry lines on her face. The air on the planet was good for breathing, but everything else looked dangerous. The gravity was stronger than Earth, which meant everything would be heavier and harder to move. The temperature changed from very hot to very cold without warning. Lightning storms happened all the time, and they were much stronger than anything they had seen before. "This place will kill us all," said Tom Blake as he tried to fix another broken system. Sweat dripped from his face even though the ship was cold. He had been working for 3 days straight trying to keep the engines running. Behind them, 847 people waited in the sleeping rooms. They were all that was left of humanity after Earth became too poisoned to live on. The air had turned bad, and the water was full of chemicals that made people sick. These people on the ship were supposed to find a new home, but now they were stuck going to a world that looked like it wanted to eat them alive. The ship's computer had already marked the planet as a Class 5 Deathworld. That meant even the smartest aliens in the galaxy would never try to live there, but the humans had no choice. Their fuel was almost gone, and their food would only last 2 more months. Captain Reed looked at the faces of his crew. They were scared, but they were also determined. Humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They had lived through the worst things Earth could throw at them. Maybe they could survive this too. "Start the landing process," he said to his pilot. The ship began to shake as it entered the atmosphere. The storms hit them right away. Lightning crashed against the hull, and the wind tried to tear the ship apart. 3 of the 4 landing pods broke away from the main ship and crashed into different parts of the continent below. What the humans did not know was that aliens were watching them. The collective was a group of 12 different alien species that worked together. They had been watching this part of space for hundreds of years. They used dangerous planets like this one to keep other species away from their territory. Number 1 had ever been able to live on a Class 5 Deathworld before. The aliens watched from their hidden ships as the human vessel fell toward the planet. They felt sorry for the humans, but they also felt curious. How long would these strange creatures last before the planet killed them all? Ambassador Keth from the Rigel Confederacy sent a message to the other aliens. "Another primitive species has found the barrier world. They will be dead within days." "Like all the others?" the other aliens agreed. They had seen this happen many times before. Ships would crash on death worlds and the crews would die quickly. Sometimes they lasted a few days if they were lucky. The longest any species had survived on a Class 5 world was 2 weeks, but humans were different even though the aliens did not know it yet. They had spent millions of years learning to survive on Earth, which was already a dangerous planet. They had fought saber-toothed tigers and survived ice ages. They had learned to make tools and work together when things got bad. The main ship crashed into a forest of strange trees that moved like they were alive. The impact threw people around inside, but the emergency systems worked. Most of the colonists survived the crash, even though many were hurt. Captain Reed pulled himself up from the floor and looked around. The control room was full of sparks and broken glass. Half his crew were unconscious, and the other half were trying to figure out what was broken. "Status report," he called out. 3 pods are gone," said the communications officer. "We lost contact with them when we hit the atmosphere." "Life support is working, but barely," said Blake. "We have power for maybe 3 days." "The hull is cracked in 4 places," added another crew member. "We need to seal those holes or we will lose air pressure." Dr. Park was already looking at readings from outside the ship. "The air is breathable, but there are toxins in it. We need to be careful about what we touch and what we eat." "What about the other pods?" asked Reed. "No contact." "They could be anywhere on this continent. We need to assume they are on their own," Reed nodded. He had been a ship captain for 20 years and he had seen bad situations before. But this was different. This was not just about fixing a broken engine or dealing with hostile aliens. This was about survival in a place that wanted to kill them. "We need to get out of this ship," he said. "It will not protect us for long. We need to find shelter and water and food." The crew looked at him with fear in their eyes. Going outside meant facing whatever was out there. But staying in the ship meant dying slowly as their systems failed. "What about the others?" asked Dr. Park. "We find them if we can," said Reed. "But first we survive." Outside the ship, the planet waited. Strange sounds came from the forest, and the ground moved in ways that ground should not move. The storm clouds overhead flashed with lightning that was not quite the right color. The very air seemed to hum with energy that made their skin tingle. The humans did not know it yet, but they were about to begin the greatest test of their species. They had been doomed on this Deathworld, or so they thought. But humans had a gift that other species did not have. They could adapt to anything. They could learn from their mistakes, and they never gave up, the aliens watching from space expected the humans to die within days. They had no idea that these strange creatures from Earth were about to do something that would change the galaxy forever. They were about to turn a Deathworld into a home. The first night on the planet was the worst night of their lives. The humans had barely set up a basic camp when the creatures came. They moved in the darkness like shadows with teeth and claws. The colonists heard growling and scratching sounds. All around their small circle of lights. Dr. Park was the first to see one of the predators clearly. It was about the size of a large dog, but it had 6 legs and a mouth full of sharp teeth. When it spit at a rock near her feet, the stone began to smoke and melt. The creature's saliva was like acid that could eat through metal. "Stay back from the perimeter," she called out to the others. "Their spit can burn through our equipment." Lieutenant Maria Santos organized the defense. She had been a soldier for 12 years, and she knew how to protect people. She placed the colonists in a tight circle with their backs to each other. The strongest people stood on the outside with whatever weapons they could find. The attacks came in waves. First the acid spitters tried to break through their defenses. Then flying creatures with razor-sharp wings dove at them from above. The humans learned quickly that fire kept most of the predators away, so they kept burning pieces of the ship's hull all night long. But the worst discovery came at dawn. While checking the area around their camp, Tom Blake found holes in the ground that had not been there before. Something was digging tunnels beneath them. The creatures could sense their body heat through the soil and rock. "We cannot stay here," said Captain Reed. "This whole planet is trying to kill us. Where can we go?" asked Dr. Park. "Every direction looks the same." They had crashed in a forest, but it was not like any forest on Earth. The trees moved there, branches even when there was no wind. Vines hung down from above, and they seemed to reach toward anything that walked below them. Flowers grew in bright colors, but when people got too close, they released clouds of dust that made them dizzy and sick. Santos sent scouts in 4 directions to look for better shelter. Only 3 came back. The 4th scout had been found wrapped in vines with his life drained away. The plants on this world were as dangerous as the animals. "We need to learn how this ecosystem works," said Dr. Park. "Everything here has evolved to kill, but there must be patterns we can understand." She began to study the creatures and plants around them. The acid spitters hunted in packs of 3 or 4. They were active during the day and slept underground. At night, the flying creatures came out when the sun was setting, and they avoided bright lights. The tunneling creatures could sense heat, but they could not see very well. Captain Reed made a decision that saved their lives. Instead of trying to fight the planet, he decided they would learn from it. Every day, the colonists would study something new about their environment. They would find out what was dangerous and what was useful. The humans began to adapt faster than anyone expected. They learned to make tools from the bones of dead creatures. They discovered that some of the poisonous plants could be used as medicine if prepared correctly. They found ways to use the electromagnetic storms to charge their equipment. After 2 weeks, they had built a real shelter using materials from the ship and resources from the planet. They had figured out how to purify water and grow food in the alien soil. Most importantly, they had learned the patterns of the predators and could predict when attacks would come. The aliens watching from space could not believe what they were seeing. The monitoring stations had recorded everything. Most species died within days on a Class 5 Deathworld. The few that lasted longer usually went insane from the constant stress and fear, but the humans were different. They were not just surviving. They were studying the planet and learning from it. They were turning the dangers into advantages. Ambassador Keth reviewed the surveillance reports with growing confusion. These creatures are not behaving like other species. They should be dead by now, or at least hiding in their crashed ship. What are they doing instead? Asked High Counselor Vaith. They are exploring. They are experimenting. They are adapting their behavior based on what they learn. The other aliens found this hard to believe. Most intelligent species had one or two ways of dealing with threats. They either ran away or fought back. The humans seemed to have a third option that none of them had seen before. They learned. Back on the planet, the colonists had made contact with survivors from two of the other crash sites. Using salvaged communication equipment, they had established regular contact with groups scattered across the continent. Instead of competing for resources, they began to share information and help each other. The group led by Dr. Park had learned how to process the neurotoxic spores from the flowers. When treated properly, they became powerful medicine. The group led by Engineer Blake had figured out how to use the acid from the spitters to cut through the hardest rock. Another group had learned to train some of the smaller creatures to work with them instead of against them. We are not just surviving, Captain Reed said during one of their evening meetings. We are building something new here. The colonists had changed physically too. The stronger gravity was making their muscles and bones harder. The constant danger had sharpened their reflexes. They moved faster and thought more clearly than they had on Earth. Children who had been born during the journey were growing up differently than human children ever had before. They seemed to understand the patterns of the planet instinctively. They could sense when predators were near, and they learned to use the plant toxins safely. Dr. Park made a discovery that would change everything. The creatures on this planet were not just randomly dangerous. They were part of a complex ecosystem that had evolved over millions of years. Every predator had prey, and every prey had defenses. The humans were not supposed to be part of this system, but they were forcing their way in. We are becoming part of the food chain, she told the others. But we are not at the bottom where most new species start. We are moving toward the top. The aliens monitoring the planet sent urgent reports back to the Collective Council. Something unprecedented was happening on the barrier world. The humans were not just surviving a Class 5 Deathworld. They were beginning to dominate it. This changes everything, said Ambassador Keth. If they can survive here, then they can survive anywhere. The Collective faced a problem they had never encountered before. Their natural barrier was becoming a training ground for a species that might be more dangerous than any they had ever met. 6 months after the crash, the human settlement looked nothing like what the aliens expected to see. Instead of a desperate group of survivors, huddled around the wreckage of their ship, they saw a thriving community that had spread across several square kilometers of the continent. The humans had built their homes using a combination of salvaged ship parts and materials harvested from the planet itself. The walls were made from a paste created by mixing the acid from the spitters with local minerals. This created a substance harder than steel that could withstand the claws and teeth of the largest predators. Tom Blake had become a master of biological engineering. He had studied the acid spitters so carefully that he could predict their behavior patterns. His team had built mining equipment that used the same chemical processes as the creature's saliva. They could now cut through the hardest rock on the planet and extract metals that were impossible to find on Earth. Dr. Park had made discoveries that revolutionized their understanding of the planet's ecosystem. The neurotoxic spores that had nearly killed them in the first week were now being processed into the most effective medicine they had ever used. Diseases that would have been fatal on Earth were cured in days with their new treatments. The electromagnetic storms that had crashed their ship were now powering their entire settlement. The humans had learned to build conductors that could capture and store the energy from the lightning. They had more electrical power than they had ever had on Earth, but the biggest change was in the humans themselves. Living on a world where everything was trying to kill them had made them stronger and smarter. The higher gravity had increased their bone density and muscle mass. Their reflexes were faster and their senses were sharper. They could hear predators approaching from much farther away than should have been possible. The children born on the planet were even more remarkable. They showed abilities that amazed the adults. They could navigate through the dangerous forest without getting lost. They could identify poisonous plants by smell alone. They seemed to understand the patterns of the predators instinctively. Captain Reed had established regular communication with 5 other survivor groups scattered across the continent. Instead of forming separate colonies, they had created a network of connected settlements. Each group specialized in different aspects of survival and development. The northern group had learned to domesticate some of the flying creatures. They used them to carry messages between settlements and to scout for new resources. The southern group had discovered underground water sources that were pure and safe to drink. The western group had learned to grow earth crops in the alien soil by using processed plant matter as fertilizer. The cooperation between the groups was something the aliens had never seen before. Most species that crashed on Deathworlds either died quickly or split into competing factions that fought over resources. The humans were doing the opposite. They were working together and sharing everything they learned. Lieutenant Santos had organized hunting parties that could take down the largest predators on the planet. But they were not just killing for food. They were studying the creatures and learning from them. They had discovered that the 6-legged acid spitters were actually quite intelligent. They could be trained to guard the settlements and to hunt other predators. The humans had also learned to communicate with some of the creatures using a combination of sounds and gestures. The smaller underground dwellers could be convinced to dig tunnels for the humans in exchange for food and shelter. The flying creatures would carry messages if treated with respect and given proper rewards. Dr. Park made a discovery that changed their understanding of the planet completely. The ecosystem was not just randomly dangerous. It was a testing ground that had evolved over millions of years to filter out weak species and strengthen the ones that survived. This planet is not trying to kill us, she explained to the others. It is trying to make us stronger. The evidence was everywhere. The creatures that survived on this world were faster and smarter than similar species on other planets. The plants had developed chemical defenses that were incredibly complex. The environment itself seemed designed to push evolution forward. At an accelerated rate, the humans were not just adapting to the planet, they were being improved by it. Their technology was advancing faster than it ever had on Earth. They were solving problems that had puzzled scientists for decades. They were creating new materials and new medicines that would have been impossible to develop in a safe environment. The aliens monitoring the planet were becoming increasingly concerned. Their surveillance showed that the humans were not just surviving on the Deathworld, they were thriving. Their population had actually increased since the crash. New children were being born healthy and strong. Ambassador Keth called an emergency meeting of the Collective Council. We have a problem. These humans are not behaving like any species we have encountered before. What do you mean? Asked High Counselor Vaith. They are using the Deathworld as a tool. They are allowing it to make them stronger instead of fighting against it. The other council members found this hard to believe. Every species in the galaxy had the same basic survival instincts. When faced with extreme danger, they either fled or fought. The humans seemed to have a third option that none of them understood. They are learning from everything that tries to kill them, continued Keth. They are turning the planet's weapons into their tools. They are becoming something we have never seen before. Back on the planet, the humans were preparing for their next phase of development. They had not only survived the Deathworld, but had begun to master it. The predators that had once terrorized them now avoided human settlements. The plants that had once poisoned them now provided medicine and materials. Captain Reed stood on a hill overlooking their main settlement. Below him he could see houses and workshops and farms. Children played in areas that had been death traps just months before. Adults worked with creatures that had once been their enemies. "We are not the same species that crashed here," he said to Dr. Park, who was standing beside him. "No, we are not," she agreed. "We are something new, something that has never existed." Before, the humans had become the apex predator on a planet where nothing was supposed to survive. They had not done it through superior firepower or technology. They had done it through intelligence and adaptability and cooperation. The aliens watching from space were beginning to understand that they had made a serious mistake. They had assumed that the humans were just another primitive species that would die on the barrier world. Instead, they had created something that might be more dangerous than anything in the galaxy. The humans were no longer trapped on a death world. They were being forged by one into something that could survive anywhere. 2 years after the crash, the planet had changed in ways that surprised even the humans. The ecosystem that had once been perfectly balanced was now shifting to accommodate a new apex predator. The humans had not just adapted to the death world. They had begun to reshape it. Dr. Park noticed the changes first during her daily research trips into the forest. The acid spitters that had once attacked anything that moved now avoided areas where humans lived. The flying creatures that had terrorized them during their first weeks on the planet now flew around human settlements instead of through them. "They are learning to fear us," she told Captain Reed. "The predators are changing their behavior patterns to avoid contact with humans." This was something that had never happened before on any planet. Predators were supposed to be fearless. They were supposed to hunt whatever they could catch. But the creatures on this world had learned that humans were more dangerous than anything else in their environment. The underground dwellers had stopped digging attack tunnels near human settlements. The poisonous plants had reduced the toxicity of their spores in areas where humans lived regularly. Even the electromagnetic storms seemed to be less frequent and less violent than they had been during the first year. Lieutenant Santos led expeditions to study these changes. Her teams found evidence that the planet's ecosystem was adapting to human presence faster than should have been possible. Evolutionary changes that should have taken thousands of years were happening in months. "The planet is not just testing us anymore," she reported. "It is accepting us as part of the natural order." The humans had developed technologies that impressed even themselves. By combining salvaged ship components with materials harvested from the planet, they had created tools that were more advanced than anything they had possessed on Earth. Tom Blake had perfected the art of biological engineering. His workshop could produce cutting tools that were sharper than any metal blade. He had learned to grow materials instead of manufacturing them. His team could create substances with properties that defied conventional physics. The humans had also learned to work with the planet's life forms in ways that amazed the watching aliens. The acid spitters now served as living defense systems around human settlements. They had been trained to attack only designated targets and to ignore humans completely. The flying creatures had become messengers and scouts. They could carry complex messages between settlements and could be trained to search for specific resources. Some had even learned to perform simple tasks, like carrying tools or warning of approaching dangers. The underground dwellers had been convinced to help with construction projects. They could dig tunnels and foundations much faster than any human machine. In return, the humans provided them with food and protection from larger predators, but the most remarkable development was in the human children. Those born on the planet were developing abilities that surpassed anything seen in human history. They could navigate through the most dangerous parts of the forest without getting lost. They could identify threats and opportunities that adults missed completely. The children seemed to understand the planet's rhythms on an instinctual level. They knew when storms were coming hours before the weather monitoring equipment detected them. They could predict where predators would appear and which plants were safe to touch. Captain Reed made a decision that would change the future of both species. He authorized the first expedition to the planet's second continent. This was a journey that would take them across an ocean filled with creatures that had destroyed alien research vessels in the past. "We cannot stay on one continent forever," he told the settlement leaders. "We need to expand and explore. This planet is our home now, and we need to understand all of it." The expedition team consisted of 50 volunteers led by Lieutenant Santos. They traveled in boats built from materials that had been tested against the most corrosive substances on the planet. The hulls were coated with a biological armor that could repair itself if damaged. The crossing took 3 weeks, and they encountered sea creatures that were even more dangerous than the land predators. Tentacled monsters that could crush metal tried to destroy their boats. Flying creatures that lived above the water dove at them with razor-sharp beaks. Acid storms that could dissolve conventional materials rained down on them, but the humans had learned to turn every threat into an opportunity. They harvested materials from the sea creatures they killed. They learned to predict and avoid the acid storms. They even discovered that some of the flying creatures could be trained to guide them to safe harbors. When they reached the second continent, they found an environment that was even more hostile than their original landing site. The gravity was stronger, the predators were larger, the weather was more violent, but the humans were no longer the same species that had crashed on the planet 2. Years earlier, they established a new settlement within a month. Within 3 months, they had made contact with the original settlements and established regular trade routes. Within 6 months, they had begun to domesticate the local creatures and were planning expeditions to the third continent. The aliens monitoring the planet were no longer just concerned. They were genuinely afraid. The surveillance data showed that humans were not just surviving on the Deathworld. They were conquering it. They were spreading across the surface faster than any species had ever expanded on any planet. Ambassador Keth presented his findings to the collective council with a sense of urgency that had never been seen before. "We are witnessing the emergence of a species that could threaten the stability of the galaxy. How is that possible?" asked High Counselor Vaith. "They are just primitives who crashed on a Deathworld." "They were primitives 2 years ago," replied Keth. "Now they are something entirely different. They are using the Deathworld as a training ground to develop abilities that we have never seen before." The council members reviewed the surveillance reports with growing alarm. The humans were not just adapting to extreme environments, they were learning to control them. They were turning the most dangerous planet in the sector into a base of operations. "What happens when they decide to leave?" "The planet?" asked one of the council members. "That is what we need to prepare for," said Keth. "They are already building spacecraft using hybrid technologies that combine their original designs with materials harvested from the Deathworld. These ships will be able to survive in environments that would destroy our vessels." The humans had indeed begun to build new ships. The designs were based on the original colony ship, but they incorporated everything that had been learned about surviving in extreme environments. The hulls were made from biological materials that could heal themselves. The engines used power sources that had been developed from the planet's electromagnetic storms. Dr. Park led the research team that was developing the new propulsion systems. "We are not just building ships," she explained to the others. "We are building vehicles that can survive anywhere in the galaxy." The aliens realized that their strategy of using Deathworlds as barriers had backfired completely. Instead of stopping the humans, they had created something that could go anywhere and survive anything. The species that had been doomed on the Deathworld was now preparing to spread across the galaxy. Captain Reed stood in the observation deck of their new orbital construction platform. Below him, the planet that had once been their prison was now their launching pad. Ships were being built in the orbital bays that could carry humans to worlds that other species considered uninhabitable. "We came here to die," he said to Tom Blake, who was overseeing the construction. "Instead, we learned to live." The humans had become something unprecedented in galactic history. They were a species that thrived in environments that killed everything else. They had turned a Deathworld into a home, and now they were preparing to make the entire galaxy their territory. 5 years after the crash, the humans had built a civilization that defied everything the aliens thought they knew about evolution and survival. The planet that was supposed to be their tomb had become the foundation of an empire that stretched across 3 continents and into orbital space. The first sign that the galaxy was about to change came when a collective reconnaissance vessel suffered a critical system failure near the planet's orbit. The ship was carrying a crew of 12 aliens who were monitoring human activities. When their life support systems failed, they expected to die in the cold emptiness of space. Captain Reed received the distress signal on his personal communicator. He was in the middle of a planning session for the next wave of interstellar exploration when the alien transmission came through. The message was in a language that the humans had never heard before, but the urgency was unmistakable. "There is a ship in distress out there," Reed told his staff. "Prepare a rescue mission." "Sir," said Lieutenant Santos, "we do not know who they are or what they want. They could be hostile." "They are dying," Reed replied. "That is all we need to know." The rescue mission launched within 2 hours. The humans used one of their new hybrid vessels that could survive in the harsh environment of space better than any ship the aliens had ever seen. The hull was made from biological materials that could seal breaches automatically. The engines used power systems that had been developed from the planet's electromagnetic storms. When they reached the alien vessel, they found a crew that was barely alive. The life support systems had failed completely, and the aliens were suffocating in their own ship. The humans cut through the hull using tools that had been developed from the acid spitters and carried the aliens to safety. The rescued aliens were taken to the human orbital station, where Dr. Park and her medical team worked to keep them alive. The aliens had different biology than humans, but the medical techniques that had been developed on the Deathworld were adaptable enough to treat almost any form of life. Ambassador Keth was among the rescued crew members. He had been observing the humans for years, but this was his first direct contact with them. As he recovered in the human medical facility, he was amazed by what he saw. The humans had built a space station that was more advanced than anything in collective territory. The materials were stronger than the best alloys the aliens could produce. The life support systems could adapt to any form of biology. The power systems generated more energy than should have been possible. "How did you develop this technology so quickly?" Keth asked Dr. Park during one of his medical examinations. "We learned from the planet," she replied. "Everything that tried to kill us taught us something new. We turned every threat into an opportunity." Keth realized that the humans had accomplished something that the collective thought was impossible. They had used a Deathworld as a university. They had learned from the most dangerous environment in the galaxy and used that knowledge to surpass every other species in technological development. When the rescued aliens were healthy enough to travel, the humans provided them with a ship to return to collective space. The vessel was a gift that demonstrated human technological capabilities. It was faster and more durable than any ship the aliens had ever seen. Ambassador Keth returned to the Collective Council with a report that shocked every member. He described a species that had not just survived on a Class 5 Deathworld, but had used it to become more advanced than any civilization in the galaxy. "They saved our lives," he told the Council. "They could have left us to die or captured us for interrogation. Instead, they rescued us and sent us home with gifts." High Counselor Vaith found this hard to believe. Species that develop in extreme environments are supposed to be aggressive and hostile. "They should see us as enemies." "That is what we expected," replied Keth. "But humans are different. They are cooperative by nature. They help each other survive, and they extend that cooperation to other species." The Council faced a decision that would determine the future of the galaxy. The humans represented either the greatest threat or the greatest opportunity they had ever encountered. They were powerful enough to conquer any world, but they seemed more interested in cooperation than conquest. What do they want? Asked one of the council members. They want to explore, said Keth. They want to learn. They want to spread across the galaxy and establish new settlements. But they are not interested in destroying existing civilizations. The humans had indeed begun to expand beyond their original planet. The first interstellar expedition had launched the previous month. The target was a Class 4 Deathworld that the collective had marked as uninhabitable. The humans expected to establish a new colony there within a year. Captain Reed had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the human space fleet. The ships under his command were unlike anything that had ever been built. They could survive in environments that would destroy conventional spacecraft. They could repair themselves if damaged. They could adapt to any situation. We are not conquerors, Reed explained to his fleet commanders. We are explorers. We are looking for new homes and new opportunities. We will defend ourselves if attacked, but we prefer to make friends rather than enemies. The human expansion was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of claiming territory and excluding other species, the humans established trading posts and research stations. They shared their technology with anyone who was interested. They helped other species solve problems that had puzzled them for generations. The children born on the Deathworld were now adults with abilities that amazed even their parents. They could survive in environments that would kill normal humans. They could communicate with alien species that had never been contacted before. They could solve complex problems that required understanding multiple fields of science. These enhanced humans became the ambassadors and explorers who carried their species to new worlds. They established colonies on planets that other species considered uninhabitable. They made contact with civilizations that had been isolated for centuries. Dr. Park had been appointed as the director of human expansion. Her job was to ensure that human colonies were established safely and that contact with alien species was handled diplomatically. She had learned that the key to human success was not just technological superiority but also the ability to adapt and cooperate. We are not trying to replace anyone, she explained to representatives from various alien governments. We are trying to fill empty spaces. We can live on worlds that you cannot use. We can solve problems that you cannot handle. We can be partners rather than competitors. The Collective Council eventually voted to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. The decision was not unanimous, but it was practical. The humans were expanding whether the aliens liked it or not. It was better to work with them than to fight them. Ambassador Keth was appointed as the first collective representative to humanity. His job was to establish treaties and trade agreements that would benefit both species. He had learned during his time on the human space station that these strange creatures were more interested in cooperation than conquest. They could have taken over our territory years ago, he reported to the council. They have the technology and the ability, but they choose to work with us instead. They are not like any species we have encountered before. The galaxy was entering a new age. The humans had proven that intelligence and adaptability were more powerful than any weapon. They had shown that cooperation was more effective than conquest. They had demonstrated that even the most dangerous environments could be turned into opportunities for growth and development. Admiral Reed stood on the observation deck of the human flagship as it approached a new star system. The crew was preparing to establish humanity's 10th colony on a world that had been considered uninhabitable by every other species in the galaxy. We were supposed to die on that death world, he said to Dr. Park, who was standing beside him. Instead, we learned to live. The humans had fulfilled their destiny in a way that no one had expected. They had become the gardeners of the galaxy, turning empty and dangerous worlds into thriving colonies. They had become the teachers, sharing their knowledge with species that had been struggling with unsolvable problems. They had become the friends that every civilization needed when facing the challenges of an uncertain universe. The species that had been doomed on the Deathworld had become the hope of the galaxy.